Hey guys, tonight we drift far from the buzz of your glowing phone screen and the soft rustle of your blanket to an older world, one bathed in sun, dust, and ritual. You're standing on the edge of the ancient Egyptian desert, somewhere near Thebes, with the Nile lazily curling in the distance. The sky stretches huge and golden orange, and every breath feels dry, spiced with distant incense and the faint tang of resin. You're not here as a tourist, though. You're here for something quieter, slower, and, well, dead. Because tonight, we're not visiting the land of the living, we're descending, gently, into the meticulous, magical, and weirdly cozy process of mummification. The thing is, you probably wouldn't survive this. No offense. It's just that the ancient Egyptians had very specific ideas about what to do with your body once you kicked the sacred sand bucket, and they weren't exactly OSHA compliant. You're about to be plucked, drained, salted, and wrapped tighter than your favorite childhood burrito. Still comfy? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying flat now. No, not as a corpse, yet, but as a quiet observer, watching time fold backwards. Around you, the desert's edge flickers and reforms into bustling movement. You're standing just outside a modest house of mourning, its walls of sun-dried brick nearly glowing in the afternoon heat. Inside, a body lies on a simple reed mat, hands crossed neatly. There's no smell, yet. But there will be, and soon. That's why the family's already sent for the embalmers. This isn't just any family, and yet, it also kind of is. Not royal, not poor. Maybe the local scribe, or a merchant who did pretty well selling beer and fish. Enough wealth to afford the full works. You can tell by the linen already waiting, neatly folded in long strips. Outside, life ticks along gently. Kids dart past playing some chaotic version of tag. A woman sells dates from a basket shaded under palm fronds. Somewhere, a scribe grumblings about ink drying too fast. But in here, inside the stone chamber thick with shade, everything is quiet. This is the first pause in a long, sacred process. It begins with waiting. You don't embalm someone while they're still warm. So you wait. Salt is. You hear them before you see them. A trio in simple linen kilts arrives, their tools tucked into leather pouches. One carries a bundle of reeds, another a polished bronze knife wrapped in cloth. They don't knock, they just nod at the mourners, glance at the body, and begin the first step, the removal. Not of organs, don't get ahead of yourself. First, they transport the body. Carefully, they lift it onto a makeshift stretcher of woven reeds and carry it down a winding alley toward the embalmer's tent. This is a sacred journey, but low-key, no parades yet. Just hushed steps and the dry creak of papyrus sandals. The tent itself is strange. You expected something grander, maybe. Instead, it's a shaded pavilion on the edge of town, surrounded by sand and silence. Inside, jars, linen, natron by the sack. There's a smell, sharp and clean, like mineral salts and old cedar. This is the Ibu, the place of purification, and it's your body's next stop. Water from the Nile is sprinkled over the corpse, not too much, just enough to symbolically cleanse. Your skin, or the skin of the person being mummified, is wiped with palm wine. You imagine a priest muttering prayers, but no, this is more chemistry than liturgy right now. The goal? Halt decay, fast. Here's a quirky tidbit you wouldn't expect. Embalming was partly a performance. The main embalmers were seen as priestly technicians, yes, but also kind of like mortuary magicians. They often wore jackal masks to imitate Anubis, the god of embalming, just in case he was watching and felt like judging their technique. You imagine slipping on a latex glove. They slipped on a god's face. No pressure. There's a quiet reverence to all of it, but there's also speed, because time matters. In this heat, you don't have days to dawdle. Natron is already being measured and weighed in clay bowls, and someone is heating resin in a wide bronze pan over a low flame. That crackling, that's pine pitch warming up for its starring role later on. And while we're here, a quick scholarly disagreement for you. Some Egyptologists believe these early steps were performed only by trained specialists, a kind of embalmer guild. Others argue there may have been more community-based approaches, especially in smaller towns. There's even a fringe theory that early mummification began as trial and error, like an overly ambitious DIY project gone kind of right. Whatever the truth, it worked for thousands of years. You step outside the tent for a moment. You're back in the embalming tent now, and the silence has deepened. Gone is the gentle bustle of setting up tools and measuring salt. Now the work begins. The embalmers, still masked as jackals, gather around the body with the reverence of surgeons and the choreography of seasoned stage performers. No blood, no haste, just deliberate, practiced movements. You're watching what's effectively the ancient world's most morbid spa treatment unfold. The first task is transportation. Not the metaphysical kind, but literal body movement. The corpse is placed on a low, sloped table made of stone or wood, with a small trench below it to catch the runoff of what's coming. You don't ask what'll run off, you already know. Or rather, you're about to. Now here's the weird part. In all the scrolls and temple carvings you've seen in modern museums, no one ever really draws attention to how the embalmers looked in this moment. But up close, they're calm. Not solemn, not gleeful, just focused. You notice one adjust the linen cord around his waist before picking up a curved, slender tool that looks like a long crochet hook. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable. For you anyway. Because it's time to extract the brain. No gentle whisper or chant precedes it, just a jackal-masked technician gently tilting the head and sliding the hooked instrument up the nostril. Yes, up the nostril. You can feel your own nose itch and sympathy. There's a slight crunch, not unlike stepping on dried leaves, and then slow, circular movements. Here's your cheeky factoid of the night. The embalmers didn't pull the brain out whole. No, they scrambled it, like ancient eggs. Then they drain the slushy bits out or coax it through gravity and patience. In some later periods, they even skipped this step entirely. Why? Scholars still argue whether they thought brains mattered. Some evidence suggests the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of thought, while the brain was basically a useless head filler. Which means the brain hook wasn't always considered essential. Just optional, like whipped cream on a sundae, if your sundae were a corpse. Let that image lull you to sleep. Once the cranial cavity is cleared, or cleared enough, it gets a quick rinse with palm wine. Sanitary, sure, but mostly symbolic. You're still trying to shake off the vision of brains dripping out like thick honey. Sorry. Let's move along. Next, the embalmers cut a diagonal slit on the left side of the abdomen. Always the left. No one really agrees why. Possibly because of the heart's position, or maybe it's just one of those things that became sacred through sheer repetition. But once that incision is made, the real organ removal begins. Not in this section, though. We'll save that mess for the next act. But back to the death squad, as modern Egyptologists sometimes jokingly call them. This wasn't a one-man job. At least 3 specialists typically handled the procedure. The cutter, who made incisions. The slicer, who removed organs. and the lector priest who recited spells and made sure no one messed up the spiritual alignment of things. That last guy, he never touches the body. He just watches, chants, and maybe throws a little salt or incense here and there like a holy seasoning chef. You watch them work as if they've done this 1,000 times, and honestly, they probably have. Mummification was big business. We're talking industry-level volume here. Thousands of mummies, spanning centuries. So by now, this trio's probably on autopilot. You half expect them to make small talk. How's your cousin? Still working at the fish stalls? But no. Just the low rhythm of linen rustling and tools gently clinking. The tent smells now. Not bad exactly, more intense. A warm blend of sweat, incense, and something faintly metallic, like hot pennies on sun-baked stone. You inhale deeply. It's oddly calming. Familiar, like the scent memory of something ancient baked into the earth itself. A quick moment of comic relief. Ancient embalmers didn't have surgical gloves, of course. So how did they protect themselves from, corpse funk? They didn't, really. There's even a famous insult preserved in papyri. Someone calling another man an embalmer's assistant, as a way of saying, you smell like putrid organs. The past had no chill. Another surprising tidbit. The man who makes the initial abdominal cut is often treated like he's committed a crime. Seriously. In some funeral rituals, he had to be chased away with stones. Symbolically, of course, because cutting into a human body was considered a form of desecration, even when it was necessary. So the community pretended to punish him afterward, as if saying, look, gods, we didn't want to open Uncle Hotep like a fig, but we had to. It's quiet again now. The tent flaps gently in the desert wind. Outside, the sun is beginning to lean westward. Light filters through the woven reed canopy, casting striped shadows over the linen-wrapped bundles waiting for their next stage. You watch as the embalmers begin preparing the canopic jars, each one carved with a different animal-headed deity, each one destined to hold a specific organ. But that, dear listener, is for tomorrow's lesson in organ geography. For now, you rest by the embalmer's side, the heat hugging your shoulders, your thoughts drifting like dust motes in filtered sunbeams. This is only the beginning. You're still in the embalming tent, and things are about to get deeply personal. That diagonal cut on the left side of the abdomen, it wasn't for show. Now the real excavation begins. You're standing just a little closer than you probably want to be as the embalmers lean in, tools gleaming faintly with oil, and begin removing organs like items off a packing list for the afterlife. First out, the lungs. Puffy, fragile, and usually the first to decay. They come free with gentle prying, then get rinsed, dried, and set aside on a palm fiber mat. The liver follows, bigger, firmer, a bold centerpiece of the internal scene. The stomach is next, and yes, if the person had a heavy last meal, this part gets a little messy. You politely avert your gaze as if you're not already nose-deep in a millennia-old dissection. Then comes the intestines. Long, slippery, coiled like an anaconda on a lazy Sunday. The embalmers handle it with the casual efficiency of people who've done this before sunrise, and likely will again before dinner. All these organs aren't just tossed aside. No, they're treasured. Once cleaned, they're packed with natron, the sacred salt that turns rot into preservation. Then each gets its own sacred storage container, the canopic jars. These jars are cute, in a please don't haunt me way. Each one bears the head of a protective deity known as the Sons of Horus. There's Imseti, the human-headed one who guards the liver. Happy, baboon-headed, takes the lungs. Duamutef, with the head of a jackal, watches over the stomach. And Kebesenuef, falcon-headed, cares for the intestines. You remember them like cartoon characters on a very weird Saturday morning show. You wonder, why not keep everything inside the body? Why remove it at all? Historians still argue whether this was for hygiene, symbolism, or something more mysterious. One theory suggests it was an act of spiritual disassembly, taking the person apart so they could be put back together better, cleaner, more divine. Others think it was all about decay prevention. Less squish equals longer shelf life. Simple embalming math. And what about the heart? Ah, yes. You glance at the chest cavity and notice what the embalmers haven't touched yet. See, here's the thing. In many eras, the heart was supposed to stay inside. It was thought to be the seat of memory, emotion, thought, and moral judgment. The brain was background noise. But oddly, mummies have been found without their hearts, or with random objects stuffed in their place. Potatoes, yes, once. Linen balls, even scarabs made of green stone. So historians still argue whether the heart was always preserved or if some embalmers just forgot, or got lazy. Or maybe there were regional trends. Oh, you're from Lower Egypt? We don't do hearts down there. You inch closer to the embalmer holding a small, heart-sized object. It's glistening slightly, like a piece of well-oiled leather. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's a replica. Either way, it gets handled gently. Set aside for now. Its fate undecided. Now for a quirky little detail. Sometimes embalmers would stuff the empty body with fake organs made of linen, mud, or sawdust, like interior decorators for the dead. Why? Possibly to keep the body's shape, possibly to fool the gods in a pinch, or maybe just to keep the wrappings neat and photogenic, if ancient gods had Instagram. The cavity gets rinsed now, with palm wine, again, and sometimes aromatic oils or resins, not just to cleanse, but to sanctify. You catch a whiff of frankincense or maybe myrrh. It's faint, but clings to your nose like memory. Everything smells like preparation, like readiness. Outside, the sky is shifting, light losing its bite and the wind starting to carry coolness. You hear someone laughing faintly in the distance. Life continues, even as one soul prepares for death's long road trip. The embalmers begin sealing the abdominal incision, not with stitches, but sometimes with molten resin, or a glued-on patch of waxy linen soaked in oils. Some mummies were sewn shut with thread, but that wasn't the norm. One particularly fancy individual had a scarab amulet inserted into the slit, because even your surgical dressing needs bling when you're headed to the afterlife. A hush falls again. The embalmers step back, hands oily, feet dusty, their faces hidden by masks now streaked slightly from hours of work. The body's open core is now empty, cleansed, packed, and gently resealed. The organs, now drying in separate jars, sit nearby like a waiting family. And you? You feel oddly peaceful. There's a rhythm to this process, a calm in the slow, precise removal and placement. It's as though everything unnecessary is being let go, just like in sleep, or dreams, or something older than either. The lector priest steps forward now, whispering over the body. His voice is low and even, like a song remembered from childhood. He names each organ, thanks each one for its service, and calls upon the gods to guard them in their new sacred containers. No one speaks otherwise, even the wind seems to quiet. And then the priest steps back. The embalmers begin the next step, salting, but that's for later. Tonight you linger a bit longer with the emptied body, resting quietly under the flickering shadows of a woven reed canopy. Everything smells of salt and oil, and the strange dignity of endings. You wake into the same dry silence, the same soft crackle of linen, and now a new texture to the air, the smell of salt. Not beachy, not fresh, this is ancient salt. Natron, a mix of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and traces of other desert minerals, mined from dry lake beds like Wadi Natron. You're watching it being handled with reverence, as if each grain were a sacred text. The embalmers are preparing for the 40-day sleep, not for themselves, though they certainly look like they could use a nap, but for the body, now lying stiff and emptied on its wooden table. This is the phase where time slows, or maybe stops. One of them opens a reed basket and begins to pour natron across the corpse's chest. Another scoops a handful and pats it gently into the armpits. They move methodically, like gardeners covering tender roots with soil. Every crevice, every hollow is filled. The abdominal cavity, empty now, lined with linen or sawdust, is packed until it swells slightly. Even the face is coated, eyes and mouth gently hidden beneath a veil of powder. Imagine being salted like a side of beef and then left out in the sun for over a month. Not ideal for your weekend plans, but absolutely perfect for eternal preservation. You notice they don't just pile it on. There's technique here. Natron draws out moisture, every last drop, and with it, the threat of decay. After 40 days, the body will weigh far less and feel almost leathery, shrunk, darkened, but astonishingly intact. If you've ever left apple slices out too long, you've seen the prototype. Now here's a quirky detail you might not expect. Sometimes, embalmers reuse natron. That's right, your sacred desiccation powder might have been previously used on a neighbor, or a goat. Efficiency was eternal and salty. As the natron settles, you watch them shift the body onto a sloped board where runoff can drain into a small clay basin. It's not glamorous, but it works. You'd be surprised how much liquid even a dry corpse still holds. The embalmers move around like dancers in slow motion. Not a word is spoken, not out of solemnity necessarily, but out of respect for the process. The body is not a corpse to them, it's becoming something else. A sa, the sacred, purified version of the self. Not just a shell, but a vessel. Outside, the wind has picked up. It sifts through the tent flaps, lifting one corner to reveal the horizon dusted in gold. A falcon circles high above, Horus maybe, or just a bird doing bird things. But it feels symbolic, and that's good enough for tonight. The embalmers carefully begin laying natron beneath the body as well. It's a full wrap, a mummy sandwich, if you will. They'll leave this bundle undisturbed now, except for a few check-ins, to let the salt work its desert magic. No refrigeration needed when the earth itself wants you dry. And while the body dries, life goes on. Some embalmers use this time to prep the wrappings, long linen strips soaked in resin or perfumed oils. Others mix unguents, clean canopic jars, or carve amulets. One lights a cone of incense and places it at the foot of the table, the smoke curling like script in forgotten languages. Here's your debate of the night. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian could afford this level of mummification. Some claim these elaborate rites were for the elite, while others point to evidence of more modest versions available to commoners. Mummification wasn't binary. It existed on a sliding scale. Gold mask? Fancy. Onion mask? Affordable. No mask? Still counts. In fact, some cheaper mummifications skipped internal organ removal entirely. They'd just inject the body with cedar oil, seal it up, and wait. Basically, pressure wash from the inside. Not pleasant, not dignified, but faster and far more cost-effective, like the express lane to eternity. But the one you're witnessing now, this is the full ritual, the Deluxe package. 40 days of patient drying, followed by a week or more of careful wrapping. A kind of ancient slow cooker, set it and forget it. You glance around and notice other bodies under their own salted blankets. Some are barely adult-sized, others larger. This is a workshop, yes, but it's also a gallery of the almost gone. And despite the stillness, it pulses with intention. Let's not forget, mummification wasn't about preserving the body just for fun. It was to give the soul, the ka, a place to return to each night. The Egyptians didn't believe in a tidy afterlife where your soul floats up and waves goodbye. No, your spirit had work to do, travel, trials, judgment, and it needed its body like you need a good hotel on a long road trip, which is why they went to all this trouble, why they salted and wrapped and perfumed and prayed, why they filled tombs with food, furniture, pets, and sometimes comically bad poetry. Eternity is long, better to be well prepared. You sit in a quiet corner now, watching the shadows stretch across the tent. One of the embalmers sips from a clay cup and sighs, the kind of sigh that says, Day 27 of drying, almost there. They're not just workers, they're gatekeepers. They keep the dead company through this long, salty slumber. And the body, no longer oozing, no longer fresh, has begun its transformation. It's darker, firmer, no longer something that lived, but something that will live again in a different realm. You can almost feel the pulse of ancient belief under the hush of drying salt. A faith so deep, so instinctual, it makes even death feel like an extended nap. Sleep well, you salted soul. The 40 days pass like dust carried on wind. Slow, quiet, inevitable. When you step back into the embalming tent, the air feels different. Less pungent, more sacred. The natron has done its work. What was once a moist, pliable body is now firm, dried, and ready for the next transformation. You lean in to look, and yeah, it's still a little creepy. The skin's darkened to a leathery brown, and the eyes are gone. Empty sockets, staring nowhere. Time to fix that. This, dear listener, is where ancient Egyptian creativity kicks into high gear. The embalmers begin gently brushing off the remaining salt with linen cloths. Not all of it. Some salt stays tucked in crevices, just in case. Then comes a step that might not make modern sense, but makes perfect spiritual sense here. They stuff things back in, not the real organs. Those are still chilling in their jars. No, the embalmers fill the cavity with materials like sawdust, resin-soaked linen, or, get this, mud and spices. It's a little like restuffing a taxidermy project. You watch as they press handfuls into the chest, smoothing them down so the figure looks more alive, or at least symmetrical, and then comes the head. Those empty eye sockets aren't just ignored. No, they're given care. Sometimes they're filled with linen pads. Other times? Onions. Yes, actual onions. Mini onions, ideally. Fresh ones were preferred, but you suspect they weren't picky. The belief maybe was that they restored the eye's shape or scent, or just warded off evil spirits that hated vegetables. Historians still argue whether it was ritualistic, practical, or someone's desperate culinary improvisation. Either way, it stuck. As for the mouth, no gaping here. It's often filled too with resin, wax, or linen balls. The goal isn't realism, it's symbolic sealing. This body isn't supposed to speak in the world of the living anymore. You pause, letting that settle. This idea that even the tiniest details of your dead face could affect your spiritual journey, it's oddly comforting. Death wasn't an end, it was logistics, and everything had to be just right. The embalmers pause now, cleaning their hands with a mixture of oils and natron water. The tent smells stronger than before, less decay, more resin and cedar. One of them lights another cone of incense and places it near the head of the body. Smoke swirls slowly upward, tickling the nostrils of the figure below. If it could still smell, it'd be pleasantly surprised. And now, here comes the decision point, the heart. You remember how earlier there was some confusion, some hearts left in, others removed. Some replaced by heart-shaped amulets or scarabs carved from green feldspar or glazed steatite. It's one of those little historical debates that keeps Egyptologists up at night. Some even argue that the absence of a heart was a punishment for criminals or traitors whose souls didn't deserve to be judged fairly. You watch closely now. An embalmer holds something in his hands, a small stone scarab etched with lines of script. It's cool and green, shaped like a beetle with folded wings. He places it inside the chest cavity with reverence, sealing the spiritual GPS right into the body's core. This scarab isn't just decoration, it's a stand-in heart meant to keep the soul honest during judgment, like a magical cheat code in beetle form. Sometimes spells were even inscribed onto the scarab. The most famous one pleads, "Do not stand as a witness against me." In other words, hey scarab, if the gods ask if I was a bad person, maybe just play dumb? Honestly, relatable. The embalmers resume their work with gentle care. They apply warm resin across the torso and limbs, smoothing it like varnish. This not only seals the body from moisture and bugs, it smells fantastic, like pine and thyme and distant bonfires, a spiritual cologne. Now here's a fun side note. This resin layer was often very thick. In some periods, mummies ended up looking more like candied statues than preserved humans. Modern CT scans have revealed layers upon layers of resin, sometimes to the point that bones snapped under the weight. A beautiful shiny mistake. Oops, they begin to wrap the limbs, not fully, not yet, but in preparation. One embalmer uses a dull knife to trim linen strips to even widths. Another kneels and applies scented oil to the skin. The air cools slightly. You hear the distant thump of a drum, or maybe just someone pounding grain. Inside, the face of the mummy is almost complete now. the eye sockets filled and shaped, the nose padded, the cheeks gently puffed. It's not exactly lifelike, but it's respectfully preserved, idealized. You begin to see what the embalmers were aiming for, not a corpse, but a version of the deceased the gods would recognize. Not too old, not too decayed, just eternal. You crouch beside the figure. It doesn't scare you anymore. It doesn't look sad or frightening or lost. It looks ready, as if it might wake up and sit up and say, well, are we doing this or what? And maybe, in some other realm, it already has. You return to the tent after a dreamless moment, maybe minutes, maybe centuries, and the scene has changed. The air is heavier now, fragrant with resin, myrrh, and aged oils. The body is wrapped in a calm stillness. You notice the embalmers have brought out their linen baskets, dozens of long, carefully folded strips of cloth, each one slightly frayed at the edges, each one ready to be layered in loops of eternity. This, friend, is the moment where the real visual transformation begins. The dead don't just lie there anymore. They become wrapped time. A linen-wrapped equation meant to outlast centuries. You watch as one embalmer kneels beside the foot, dipping his hands into a pot of warm resin. He coats the soul, slowly, methodically, before pressing down the first strip of linen. It clings, stiffening almost instantly. The foot becomes a relic, a reliquary, something more than bone and skin. Now multiply that by every single toe. Yes, each toe gets its own wrapping. You're watching what might be the world's slowest pedicure. Every digit is wrapped separately, padded, coated, tucked, no shortcuts. It's a bit obsessive, yes, but this isn't about speed. It's about reverence. About ensuring that in the afterlife, your toes can walk, your fingers can grasp, your limbs can move with dignity. You lean closer, fingers next. The embalmers stretch each one, wrapping it from base to tip with care. Resin holds it tight, another layer, and another. They're not just bandaging, they're building something, shaping a new version of the person. A linen sculpture of the self. And don't think this is random wrapping. Oh no. There's a system here. Some wrappings go diagonally, some spiral, some follow precise cross-hatched patterns believed to offer magical protection. It's like origami for the dead, but with incense and theology. Historians still argue whether the patterns varied by profession, region, or social status. Some evidence suggests priests were wrapped differently from soldiers, and women had distinct wrapping techniques, maybe to emphasize femininity in the next world. Other scholars say it's just a case of embalmers doing what looked good and stuck. You know, like the first person who said, let's do stripes. Very classy. And here's a slightly weird, delightful tidbit. Some mummies were wrapped with texts written directly onto the linen. Spells, prayers, names, instructions, literal cheat codes to the afterlife. Imagine your favorite hoodie also whispering spiritual affirmations as you nap. That's the vibe. The embalmers hum now, quietly, rhythmically, as they pass cloth to one another. One chants the name of Osiris under his breath. Another tucks a small amulet between the layers, right over the left thigh. You recognize it as the Tayet knot, an amulet of Isis. It's shaped a bit like a cross between an infinity symbol and a bow tie, meant to protect, to anchor. Then another, this time a Djed pillar, symbolizing stability. It's pressed against the spine before being wrapped over with more linen. You can't help but smile. It's like a spiritual back brace, stylish and symbolic. You're starting to realize this isn't just medical. This is art, ritual as sculpture. Every layer tells a story, every loop a statement, and woven within it all is the soul, somewhere near, hovering like the scent of warm honey in the heat. Outside, the afternoon is slipping into golden silence. You see a shadow flicker past the tent, probably just a cat, or maybe Bastet, the cat goddess checking in on her people. Even gods are drawn to this place. Who wouldn't be? It smells amazing, the work is meaningful, and no one's yelling. The embalmers are halfway up the torso now. The wrapping gets tighter, more structured. It's like watching someone build an elegant piece of furniture, sturdy, purposeful. The arms are wrapped separately, then crossed gently over the chest. You half expect the mummy to sit up and say, "Ah, yes, now I'm cozy." And the linen? Not just any fabric. These strips were often recycled from household linens or garments. Some bore faint dye patterns, suggesting they once wrapped living bodies, worn during weddings, feasts, or lazy mornings by the Nile. Now they cradle the dead. It's unexpectedly poetic. Cloths that once lived, living again in stillness. There's a pause in the tent. One of the embalmers steps back, holding a long, final band of linen. This one's different, smoother, narrower. It's the ceiling strip, the last one. It goes from shoulder to feet in one long, deliberate pass, locking everything in. And then, silence. The wrapping is done. You look down at the figure now, transformed. No longer a person, no longer quite a corpse. Something in between, something enduring. The skin is gone, the face is gone, but the identity, the presence, is stronger than ever. The lector priest approaches and places his palm over the chest. He speaks softly, his breath catching slightly, like a man speaking a name he hasn't said in years. You don't need to understand the words to feel them. They land like gentle stones in a still pond. And somewhere, deep beneath that linen, something listens. The mummy now lies fully wrapped, arms crossed, eyes disguised, limbs stiff but serene. And yet, it isn't finished. Not even close. Because here's the thing. A properly wrapped body was just the canvas. What came next turned it into a masterpiece of spiritual engineering. You notice the embalmers are moving more slowly now, almost tenderly. They gather around the linen-wrapped form and begin the next phase. Sealing, scenting, and safeguarding. This isn't just practical, it's theatrical. You half expect mood lighting and background music, and in a way, the flickering torchlight and the whispered chants are the soundtrack. First comes the resin, again, a thick, almost syrupy concoction that smells like old pine and cracked leather. One embalmer heats it gently over coals until it bubbles and turns glossy. Then he begins painting it across the linen, one broad stroke at a time. This is the part where the mummy starts to look more like something you'd see in a museum, darkened, glossy, shell-like. It's not to make it pretty, though it does give it that classy, eternal varnish finish. It's to protect the linen from insects, moisture, and whatever else eternity might throw at it. And yes, it kind of glues the whole thing together, too. Handy. You catch a whiff of something sweet underneath the resin. Perfumed oil. Probably lotus or cinnamon or maybe even cedar wood. Some embalmers used up to a dozen different scents on a single body. Why? Partially to mask lingering smells, but also because scent was believed to carry spiritual resonance. If you smelled like a god, maybe the gods would welcome you like one. And here's your quirky tidbit. One pharaoh, Ramesses II, had such a distinctive embalming scent that modern scientists could still detect it over 3,000 years later. A blend of frankincense, pine resin, and sandalwood. Basically the ancient world's top-tier cologne. Now comes the best part. Amulets. Not tossed in randomly, mind you. These little talismans were inserted at specific places and with specific intentions. Some were hidden deep in the folds of the linen. Others were pinned to the outer layer for dramatic effect. You spot one being tucked at the neck. A tiny gold eye, the eye of Horus. Protection against evil, disease, gossip, you name it. Another gets slipped beneath the wrappings at the ankle, a frog-shaped charm. Fertility, rebirth, and probably a good bounce in the afterlife. Some mummies had dozens, even hundreds of these, little pockets of power stitched between layers like spiritual bubble wrap. Historians still argue whether more amulets meant more status or just more paranoia. One priest gently presses an Ankh charm, the symbol of life, into the mummy's palm area. Then he wraps the hand again tighter, as if to say, hold on to this, you'll need it. And then, something fascinating. Names. Sometimes a strip of linen near the chest or feet bore inked inscriptions. The deceased's name, without a name. Your soul risked being lost, forgotten, or worse, absorbed into someone else's identity in the afterlife. Which, frankly, sounds like a paperwork nightmare. You're watching the embalmers work now as a unit, like bees in a hive, but with more oil and fewer wings. One is still murmuring spells under his breath. Another is adding a final resin seal across the torso. The lector priest sprinkles a powder over the form, probably ground incense or crushed myrrh, and makes a marking in the air. And then they pause. Now comes the mask. You've probably seen them in museums, golden faces with eyeliner so sharp it could slay a god. But not everyone got gold. Most people had masks made from painted linen or cartonnage, a kind of ancient papier-mâché made from old papyrus scrolls and glue. Still, the craftsmanship is impressive. Bold lines, strong brows, serene lips, eyes wide and eternal. The face isn't meant to resemble the deceased exactly. It's meant to resemble the ideal version of them, the face they'd want the gods to remember. You watch as one embalmer gently lowers the mask onto the head of the mummy. It settles with a faint tap, perfectly aligned. Suddenly, the wrapped figure looks complete. Not alive, not quite dead, something in between, still, intent, waiting. Another mask is being prepared nearby, smaller, less ornate, maybe for a servant or a child. Death, it turns out, was the one career where everyone got a uniform. Now for your scholarly debate. Some researchers believe the masks had magical properties, that they acted as funnels for the soul. The eyes on the mask weren't just decorative, they were portals. Through them the Ka could see offerings, visit family, attend festivals. Others argue they were more symbolic than functional, protective faceplates for the road to forever. Whatever the truth, they are beautiful. Even the simplest ones have a stillness that makes you quiet. You imagine wearing your own. Would it be calm, fierce, smiling? Would it look like the version of yourself that lives only in dreams? The embalmers gather one last time, forming a semicircle around the now fully adorned figure. The lector priest raises his hand and speaks a final blessing. You don't understand the words, but their rhythm is familiar now, like breathing, like waves. They rise, fall, and fade into the stillness of the tent. The mummy lies silent and whole, no longer raw, no longer exposed. It is now safe. Now that the body has been transformed, salted, wrapped, perfumed, and masked, it's time to shift from preservation to preparation. Because even the most beautifully embalmed corpse isn't ready for the afterlife until it can speak, and not just mumble through linen. It needs a voice the gods can hear. So tonight, you're about to witness one of the most curious and oddly poetic parts of ancient Egyptian funerary rites. The opening of the mouth ceremony. You find yourself outside the embalming tent now. The body, encased and gleaming slightly under layers of resin, lies on a wooden bier. A short procession has formed, priests in white robes, a few family members, quiet still. Behind them, a cow-headed effigy of Hathor carved in wood. Even death needs a bit of flair. The bier is slowly carried to a specially prepared space, often near the tomb's entrance or a small ritual courtyard. The stars are bright above, and the desert breathes in slow, cool gusts. The lector priest steps forward, holding a curved blade made of copper or obsidian, sometimes even gold. It's shaped like a fishhook, though you sincerely hope it's never used to catch anything. This, friend, is the Peseshkef blade. Not sharp, not lethal, ceremonial. It's the key to unlocking the senses. Because that's what this ritual is about, reawakening, restoring, giving the dead their senses back. You watch in hushed stillness as the priest gently touches the tool to the mummy's mouth, not to cut, but to symbolically open it, to grant it breath, voice, the ability to eat, speak, and recite spells in the afterlife. Then the priest moves the tool to the eyes, the ears, the nostrils. Each touch is slow, deliberate, accompanied by a murmur of incantation. One by one, the senses are unlocked. It's like flipping spiritual light switches back on. You can't help but feel moved. It's not creepy. It's caring, thoughtful, like waking someone gently after a very long nap. Here's your fringe detail. In some versions of the ritual, the priest actually acted out the roles of gods, speaking as Horus, or Osiris, or even Anubis. It turned the whole ceremony into a kind of spiritual theater, complete with lines, props, and choreography. Historians still argue whether this was meant to truly animate the dead, or simply reassure the living. Either way, you're watching a soul be dressed for its performance beyond this world. The priest now brings out offerings: bread, beer, figs, onions, and roasted meat, each one held up to the mummy's mouth as if to feed it. It's not about nourishment in this world, of course. It's symbolic. These are the first tastes of the afterlife, the spiritual equivalent of a road snack for eternity. You glance around. Every movement feels loaded with meaning. Every word spoken is a bridge between the living and the dead. You don't forget love just because the heart's not beating. Now comes a joke-worthy fact. At least one recorded version of the ceremony involved a priest touching the mummy with the hind leg of a sacrificial calf. Yes, a literal cow leg, slapped or waved gently over the body. Scholars are still arguing whether this was symbolic of strength, fertility, or just an ancient version of tag, you're divine now. You shift slightly in the sand. The stars above shimmer more brightly now. Orion, called Sa in ancient Egypt, is rising. To them, he was associated with Osiris, the lord of the underworld. Everything is clicking into place. The mummy below is not just being honored, it's being transformed into something divine. The final act? The priest recites the 47 spells of transition. Not all of them tonight, but a choice few. They cover the basics: safe passage through gates guarded by crocodiles, forgiveness of sins, proper paperwork for entering the field of reeds. The afterlife, it turns out, had some serious bureaucracy. You hear familiar words. May your mouth be opened. May your limbs be strong. May your heart not be taken from you on the day of judgment. It's part prayer, part insurance policy. And then, silence. The priest lowers the blade. The family members place their hands together. The embalming team bows their heads. The body, no longer just a corpse, but now a sacred vessel, is ready to begin its second life. It doesn't move, of course. That would be way too dramatic. But you can almost feel it settling, as if the soul inside has found a seat, adjusted the cushions, and nodded. Okay, let's go. You step back with the others as the bier is lifted once more. The procession begins again, but this time it's quieter. Not funereal exactly, more like respectful anticipation, the kind you'd show a traveler heading off on a long and unpredictable journey. As they move toward the tomb, you follow from a distance. The stars above seem brighter, clearer. The mummy's path is lit not just by firelight, but by belief, layered, ancient, impossibly deep belief in the soul's endurance. And the body, still and silent in its wrappings, is now equipped with everything it needs: sight, sound, breath, a name, a face, a voice. And you're oddly comforted, because if this is what death looked like, careful, beautiful, rich with meaning, maybe it wasn't something to fear. Maybe, like the mummy, you'd one day be wrapped in memory, sealed in love, and whispered back into being. The stars overhead have wheeled just a little farther across the sky by the time you reach the tomb. It's not far. A short walk across sand that feels cooler now, like stone powdered into velvet. The silence is comforting, broken only by the low rustle of linen and the occasional clink of pottery as someone adjusts their grip. Tonight, you witness not just a burial, but a kind of homecoming. The mummy, freshly prepared and spiritually activated, is about to be placed in its eternal dwelling. And like any good ancient Egyptian home, it's not just a hole in the ground. It's decorated, stocked, even organized by room, depending on one's budget and social status. The tomb opens before you, carved into bedrock or built from mud brick, depending on who's doing the dyeing. You descend a short ramp, the air growing immediately cooler. Inside, the walls are painted in rich colors: ochre, cobalt, dusty lapis. Scenes of life, fishing, farming, feasting, stretch across the surfaces, as if the walls themselves remember. Here's the thing. These images weren't just for reminiscing. They were believed to function in the afterlife. That mural of servants baking bread, that was supposed to be bread, eternally restocking itself. Farming scenes weren't nostalgia, they were food production contracts in divine ink. Historians still argue whether these paintings were literal magic or more symbolic, like spiritual vision boards. Either way, the dead weren't going hungry. You follow as the mummy is laid gently into its stone sarcophagus, either built snug around the body or designed to fit a nest of coffins inside one another, like sacred nesting dolls. In wealthier tombs, the mummy would go inside a painted wooden coffin, which slid into another, more ornate coffin, which then dropped into a stone sarcophagus sealed with pitch or plaster. And you know what's quirky? Some of these coffins had feet, literal carved toes poking out the bottom. Why? Maybe to help the soul walk into the afterlife. Or maybe someone just thought it was funny. You try not to giggle. The priest is watching. The burial party now arranges objects around the mummy, what you might call grave goods. There's a folded cloak, a set of cosmetic jars, food baskets tightly sealed against time, a small wooden bed even. You see amulets, clay vessels, sandals, games. It's like an eternal Amazon wish list. And yes, those aren't just miniatures for show. Egyptians believed items in the tomb became real in the afterlife. That wooden duck, it will quack and fly. That carved harp, it will sing. That board game with its little ivory pieces. Eternity's gonna be a long stretch. Best bring entertainment. Then come the shabtis, basically your eternal staff. Here's your open debate of the hour. Did everyone really believe these figures would come to life? Or were they more like tokens of social rank? Scholars still argue whether the afterlife was envisioned as an actual agricultural estate or just a metaphor for balance, harmony, and peace. Either way, shabtis were your ticket to doing absolutely no manual labor post-death. And let's be honest, that's the dream. A few priests now place jars near the wall, reserved canopic jars, in case the main set was lost or damaged. Some of these are empty. Others might contain animal parts, ashes, or even symbolic organs for protection. Belt and suspenders mummification, you might say. Someone sets down a small carved boat. That's important. In many Egyptian myths, the journey to the afterlife includes sailing across cosmic waters to reach Osiris's court. You'd better believe no one's making that trip on foot, not in sandals, not across alligator-infested night rivers. You glance at the back wall of the tomb and see a tall painted panel, false doors they're called, not for escape, but for communion. They allowed the soul, the Ka, to pass through invisibly and receive offerings left by the living. Every time someone brought bread, beer, or flowers, the spirit could slip through and partake. Which brings you to one final custom, the tomb visit. Family members didn't just bury and forget. They returned, sometimes monthly, often yearly, to clean, speak, and offer food. The dead weren't gone, they were relocated. Relatives treated tombs like quiet picnic spots, bringing meals and stories and updates. You can imagine a grandson visiting his great-uncle's tomb, setting down a loaf of date bread and saying, "The Nile's flooding again, we're fine. Your cat's still annoying." Inside the chamber, the lector priest now recites a final offering prayer. He lists every item presented: meat, onions, fruit, beer, wine, oil, milk, bread, fabric, incense. Some of it's present, some of it's imaginary. But saying the names aloud makes them real in the eyes of the gods. And then, finally, the tomb is sealed. A slab of limestone is pushed across the entrance. Mud plaster is pressed into the edges. One priest takes a small jar and paints a protective spell across the seam. Another embeds a curse tablet, a short, sharp message meant to deter grave robbers. If you break this seal, the sky will fall and your children will turn to ash. That sort of thing. Very warm, very neighborly. You take one last look before the light dims. The mummy lies still, surrounded by eternity's inventory, everything it needs to survive, thrive, and never need to come back. The priests step back, their hands still sticky with resin and prayer. The desert wind outside carries sand into the shadows, brushing the entrance gently shut. And you? You feel a strange stillness in your chest. Not sadness, not fear, just an understanding. The kind that comes when you realize that someone 3,000 years ago believed in life so much, they built another one after death, just in case. You wake into stillness again. The tomb is sealed now, its walls packed with silence and spells. But your journey isn't quite done. You've seen the body transformed, the mummy wrapped, masked, and tucked into eternity like a well-packed suitcase. Now it's time to follow the soul, to drift upward, outward, into the mysterious realm of the afterlife the Egyptians believed in with such vivid certainty. Because what good is a mummified body without a map? Step softly now. You're moving with the ba, one of several spiritual parts of a person, and maybe the most poetic. The ba was depicted as a human-headed bird capable of flying between the tomb and the heavens, between memory and myth. It's you, but lighter. You, but free. Tonight you follow the ba as it lifts from the dark sarcophagus, through the limestone cracks, into the cooling desert air. The wind catches it, and just like that you're drifting over sand dunes, temples, sycamore groves, toward the sunrise, toward the judgment hall of Osiris. And this is where things get bureaucratic. You see, for the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't just a portal, it was paperwork. The soul had to pass through gates, recite passwords, answer riddles, identify gods, and prove it hadn't been a horrible person. Think of it like an airport security line, but with crocodile demons. You hover now in the Hall of Ma'at, where the final judgment takes place. The ceiling is high and painted like the sky, stars, black lapis blue background, eternity curling across it like silk. And in the center stands a scale. On one side, your heart. On the other, a feather. Not just any feather. This is the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order. She keeps things aligned. Planets, justice, probably the seating chart at divine weddings. The idea is simple. If your heart is lighter than the feather, you pass. If it's heavier, weighed down by lies and cruelty, you get eaten. No second chances. Enter Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. Basically the worst petting zoo imaginable. She sits near the scale, drooling softly. The devourer of the dead. No one wants to end up in her belly. You float a little farther away, just to be safe. Now comes the confession, the famous negative confessions from the Book of the Dead. Unlike modern confessions where you admit your sins, this list is the exact opposite. I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not lied. 42 statements, tailored to different aspects of moral conduct, spiritual purity, and, frankly, good manners. Here's your quirky twist. Each of these statements is addressed to a different deity. Yes, 42 gods. Historians still argue whether everyone memorized the full list or if priests whispered it in their ear post-mortem. Some tombs even included cheat sheets, written versions of the confessions to be recited on demand. Ancient test prep, basically. The Ba, your soul, recites them all now. The tone is steady. You feel a flicker of pride. I have not caused pain. I have not polluted the river. I have not slandered a servant. You begin to realize this wasn't about perfection. It was about balance, being mostly good, respecting harmony, not tipping the scale too far toward selfishness. And then, the weighing. Thoth, god of wisdom, steps forward with a writing palette. He'll record the outcome. Osiris watches silently from his throne, flanked by Isis and Nephthys. The scale creaks, the heart rises gently, the feather flutters. Balance. You pass. No dramatic music, no explosion, just a kind of gentle confirmation, like a bell chiming in fog. Your heart is pure enough, your life had meaning, your soul is granted access. And with that, the doors open to the field of reeds. Now, this part varies depending on which tomb text you believe, but generally, the field of reeds was paradise, an endless landscape of tall golden grass, rivers that never flood too much, crops that grow without labor, warm breezes that never sting your skin. You step into it now, or rather, float down toward it, the ba flapping gently in the dawn light. You see houses, modest but perfect, friends, familiar but ageless, even pets, dogs running through the reeds, cats lounging on temple steps. Somewhere nearby, someone is baking. The air smells like honey and clay. And here's the best part. In the field of reeds, everything is just a little bit better than real life. Your tools don't break. Your sandals don't rub. Your neighbors are kind. Your beer is always cold, and the river is always clear. Even time moves gently here, not frozen, just softened. You sit on a bench beneath a sycamore tree, sacred to Hathor. She steps out of its trunk sometimes, offering water and shade. You wave. She winks. Eternity, it turns out, isn't lonely. Not if your name is remembered. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't about endings. It was about continuity. Mummification preserved the body, spells protected the soul, offerings sustained the spirit. But memory? That's what made you eternal. So long as someone spoke your name, your afterlife continued. So long as someone visited your tomb, your soul had reason to return. That's why they painted so much, carved so much, wrote names on every wall, every statue, every cup. Because in ancient Egypt, oblivion wasn't punishment. It was just being forgotten. And in this quiet, golden moment in the field of reeds, your name still echoes. In prayer, in memory, in history. You are home. You linger for a while in the field of reeds, unsure if you're drifting or dreaming. Either way, it feels good here. Still, warm. You can almost hear papyrus brushing in the wind, like someone turning pages in a book that never ends. But eventually, the view begins to fade, not disappear, just soften, because even paradise has layers, and your journey isn't quite over. Because while the Ba can rest, the Ka, another part of the soul, is still hungry. The Egyptians believed the Ka was your life force, your essence, and yes, it could get grumpy without regular snacks. The Ka needed to be fed, not with spiritual vibes, but with real food. Bread, beer, figs, honey, roasted meat. And not just once, daily. This is where the living came in. You shift now, almost like rewinding, and find yourself standing just outside the tomb again. It's been days, maybe weeks, since the burial. A family member, maybe a grandson, is approaching. He carries a basket covered with a linen cloth, and the smell is unmistakable, fresh bread and garlic stew. You watch as he kneels beside the sealed entrance. There's a small offering slab, carved with a shallow groove to let liquids trickle toward the tomb's interior. He sets the food down carefully. Then he lights a cone of incense. The smoke curls toward the sky, and he whispers a few words. This ritual? It's called the daily offering. For generations, Egyptians made these visits to keep the Ka satisfied. They didn't believe the dead vanished. They believed the dead needed them, and in return, the dead offered blessings, protection, and maybe even a good harvest or two. You realize now that the afterlife wasn't just for the dead. It was a collaboration, a partnership between memory and maintenance. The living made the offerings, the dead remembered their names. And this wasn't just a family affair. Temples had teams of priests performing daily offerings for deceased royals and gods. These rituals followed precise scripts, food laid out in order, Incense waved rhythmically, words recited in an unchanging cadence. It was religion mixed with stagecraft. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some tombs even had reserve Ka statues, backup vessels in case the soul got lost or tired of its body. These were often tucked away in hidden chambers called serdabs, with tiny peepholes that let the Ka watch the rituals unfold. It's weirdly adorable, like installing a divine baby monitor. You're pulled now into one of those temple rituals. Grand, echoing halls filled with stone pillars and golden statues. You watch priests file in barefoot, heads shaved, robes spotless. They carry trays of roasted duck, loaves shaped like suns, jars of beer so frothy it could pass for the Nile on laundry day. They approach a statue of Osiris and place the offerings on a polished stone table. But before anything's eaten, by the gods, the Ka, or hungry priests, they recite the transformation spell, a single line that turns mortal food into divine sustenance, just like that. It's edible by the afterlife. No kitchen magic, just sacred language. And yes, after the ritual, the leftovers were usually eaten by the temple staff. Waste not, worship not. Divine potluck. But for personal tombs, especially those of commoners, it often came down to inscriptions. Tomb walls were carved with offering formulas, prayers requesting 1,000 loaves of bread, 1,000 jugs of beer, and so on. These weren't exaggerations, they were stand-ins, a sort of magical auto-renewal subscription for the Ka. The most common version began with the phrase, "a voice offering of bread and beer," and ended with the name of the deceased. It didn't matter who read it. Any voice made it real. Even you, whispering it now, under your breath, would count. Just don't mumble. The Ka is picky. Historians still debate how literally the ancient Egyptians took all this. Did they believe the spirit actually came and slurped the offerings like a ghostly soup? Or was it more metaphorical, a spiritual energy exchange? Either way, you can't deny the beauty in the gesture. Feed the dead, and they feed your memory in return. You're back at the tomb entrance now. The family has finished their offering. A few words. A bow of the head. Then they leave. Footsteps fading into the sand. The slab is quiet again, but not empty. Inside, something stirs. The Ka is nourished. The soul remembered. And that brings us to another curiosity. Letters to the dead. Yes, actual letters. Scratched onto pottery, etched into tomb walls, written in ink on scraps of linen. People would write to their deceased relatives, asking for advice, favors, even revenge. "My neighbor keeps stealing my grain. Please intervene." Or, "My wife is ill. Send help if you can." They weren't speaking about the dead. They were speaking to them. Imagine having that kind of relationship with your great-grandmother 3 decades after she's gone. "Hey, Nana, the new harvest failed. Also, the cat won't leave your chair. Could you maybe haunt it a little?" These letters remind you that the Egyptians didn't draw a line between past and present. The tomb wasn't a grave. It was a door. And you? You're beginning to understand that death, in this culture, was never final. It was a shift in responsibility. The living cared for the dead offered protection. The cycle turned like the Nile over and over, season after season. You reach out now, whether in imagination or something deeper, and press your hand to the cool stone of the tomb. It doesn't move. You sit down beside the tomb wall now, the sand cool beneath you. There's nothing to do. No grand ceremony, no bustling priests or fragrant oils. Just you, a silent slab of stone, and the soft, slow rhythm of history settling into place. You might think everything's finished, but not in ancient Egypt, because here's the twist. Even after death, change could still happen. You see, mummification didn't freeze a person in time, it launched them into eternity, which was fluid, full of risks and surprisingly administrative. And that meant updates, maintenance, ongoing spiritual customer service. Case in point, the coffin texts and later the Book of the Dead, a constantly evolving set of magical instructions. These weren't stagnant doctrines carved in stone. They were updatable software, copied, customized, and improved generation after generation. You run your fingers along a painted wall. Spells written here might be centuries newer than the tomb itself, added by descendants, priests, or even tomb robbers with artistic ambitions. One generation might add a new protective charm, another, a more efficient way to navigate the afterlife's river of knives. That's your quirky fact today. Some spells were literally hacked mid-scroll. A priest might scribble new annotations in the margin, like, if attacked by serpent demons, see Spell 39B, Revised Edition. Even the afterlife needed patch notes. And scholars still debate whether these spells were meant to be followed step by step like a GPS for the soul, or if they served as a general mood board for surviving cosmic chaos. Maybe it was both. Either way, you start to see how the dead weren't locked into a single destiny. They had tools, they had options. One of those tools? Names. We've talked about how important a name was to the Egyptians, but now you learn something more nuanced. A name could gain power over time. The more often it was spoken, written, prayed over, the more real the soul became. A forgotten name meant a fading ka. A repeated name meant immortality. You turn and gaze up at the sky, picturing some long-dead scribe whose name was whispered by a schoolboy today while copying homework off a papyrus scroll in a museum exhibit. Boom! Resurrection. Just like that. This is also why curses against tomb robbers didn't just threaten bodily harm, they threatened erasure. May your name be cut off from the earth, they warned, a fate worse than death, obscurity. And speaking of tomb robbers, you're taken now into the darker chambers of this story, the parts no one likes to admit, because even in a culture so reverent of the dead, looting happened. A lot. The Valley of the Kings? Yeah, not exactly a gated community. Many tombs were ransacked within decades. Gold ripped from coffins, amulets stolen, mummies burned. There are documented cases where priests in later dynasties attempted to restore looted tombs, making hasty repairs and reconsecrating disturbed spirits. Imagine that. A priest, 200 years later, carefully rewinding linen over a cracked mummy, muttering, "I'm so sorry they did this to you. Let's get you tucked back in." There's a bittersweet beauty to it, like realizing that even in a world where death could be violated, care could return. And while we're getting reflective, let's visit another strange layer of mummification. Animal mummies. You blink, yes, animals. Thousands of them. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, baboons, even bulls. Some were household pets, mummified to follow their owners into the next world. Others were sacred creatures, physical incarnations of gods, especially Bastet, Thoth, and Sobek. You peek into a side chamber, dimly lit, and sure enough, rows of small bundles rest on stone shelves. You recognize the tight triangle head of a cat, the beaked form of a bird. Some even had custom coffins, complete with tiny painted eyes and gold leaf stripes. Historians still argue whether these were genuine pets, temple offerings, or mass-produced votive items sold to pilgrims. Buy one, gift a god. But regardless, the love and ritual packed into each of them is undeniable. You find yourself oddly moved. These weren't just sacrifices or symbols. They were part of the same fabric of belief. If a soul was worth wrapping, then any soul, even furry or feathered, could be honored. And that leads to one final oddity: fake mummies. Yes, sometimes embalmers got lazy or greedy or ran out of time. They'd pack a coffin with linen and mud, maybe some animal bones, and call it a day. Families still paid, prayers were still recited, and centuries later, archaeologists opened what they thought was a high priest and found stuffing. It's a bit of a letdown, but also strangely fitting, because even the idea of mummification carried power. A fake mummy could still hold a real hope. You sit now at the edge of your imagined desert. The moon is rising, huge, golden, and slow. The tombs around you are silent, but no longer eerie, just present. Patient, like friends waiting politely for their turn to speak. And you begin to understand something profound. Mummification wasn't about cheating death. It was about facing it and refusing to let it erase you. The Egyptians knew death was coming. They just insisted on preparing for it with such obsessive beauty, such layered meaning, such glittering poetry, that death itself had no choice but to pause and admire. They didn't ask to live forever. You're deep in the quiet now, deeper than tomb shafts, deeper than the painted stars on chapel ceilings. The noise of life has faded, the markets, the chants, even the rustle of linen. And what remains is something strangely soothing, the hum of time. Because once the rituals were done, once the tomb was sealed and the soul had begun its eternal travels, there came the long, sacred stillness of waiting. And you might think this is where things stop, but you'd be wrong. Because mummification wasn't just for the immediate afterlife. It was a long game, a cosmic backup plan stretched across millennia. And here, in this stretch of silence, you're about to find out just how much the Egyptians trusted the future to come back for them. You're standing now in the dark recesses of a royal tomb, let's say one from the 18th dynasty. The walls are painted but flaking. The colors, still faintly vivid, seem like memories pressed into stone. Dust lies thick as ash, and at the far end, barely visible in your flickering torchlight, is the sarcophagus. Enormous, sealed, undisturbed, or so it seems. Because many mummies didn't stay untouched, not by looters, not by nature, and not even by their own future caretakers. The Egyptians, it turns out, weren't just obsessed with dying correctly, they were also prepared to be disturbed. Let's start with the restorers. Priests from later dynasties, often under pressure from political change or religious upheaval. They'd enter ancient tombs to fix damage, reinscribe faded spells, and sometimes update theological references. Oh, the gods have changed titles since you died? No problem, we'll pencil that in. It's like sending patches to the underworld OS. Divine maintenance mode. You notice a spot on the wall where two paint styles overlap, a delicate lotus from the Old Kingdom beneath a bold solar disk from the New. Scholars still argue whether these were corrections, upgrades, or just artistic squabbles. Either way, the tomb became a living document, revised as needed. And sometimes even the mummy itself was reburied, rewrapped, rehidden. That's right, certain royal mummies were moved by protective priests during times of civil unrest. They'd sneak into tombs, gather up multiple kings and queens, and stash them in hidden cache tombs like DB320 at Deir el-Bahari. Imagine it. Priests carrying the mummies of Thutmose, Seti, and Ramses down dark passages, whispering apologies, swaddling them tighter and lowering them into secret crypts with the urgency of a family rescuing heirlooms from a burning house. And that's your quirky fact here. Some of the most famous mummies we have today, Ramses II, Ahmose I, Amenhotep I, weren't found in their original tombs. They were recovered from hiding places, sometimes labeled with... We fast forward now to the 19th century. Western archaeologists, some careful, many not, begin opening tombs, unwrapping mummies, cataloging amulets. Some do it for science, others for spectacle. Mummy unwrapping parties become a thing. People would gather in drawing rooms in London or Paris to sip sherry, while a linen-wrapped body was peeled apart like a grotesque party favor. You wince. It's not the noblest moment in archaeology. Still, from these mishandlings came some knowledge. CT scans, DNA analysis, forensic reconstructions. We've learned about royal illnesses, dental hygiene, even battle wounds. Ramses II had arthritis and a big family. King Tut had a clubfoot and possibly malaria. Their stories, once sealed in stone, were now reread in X-ray light. And that's the scholarly debate of this chapter. Was disturbing the dead ever justified by the knowledge gained? Some argue we've honored the ancient Egyptians by learning their secrets. Others say we've broken a sacred trust. The verdict? Still up for grabs. Still whispered in museums and lecture halls. But you're not here to choose sides. You're here now in a dimly lit museum. Rows of sarcophagi stand silent under LED lighting. The air smells like glass and time. You pause in front of a beautifully preserved mummy, linen still intact, face mask serene. It's easy to forget this was once a person, not just a symbol or exhibit. Someone with a favorite food, a daily routine, a hope for the afterlife. They imagined this very moment. You, reading their name, remembering them. That's what makes this all so powerful. Mummification wasn't just about physical survival. It was about narrative survival. About telling a story that outlives its author. You look closer. On the cartonnage is a painted scene. The deceased offering bread to Osiris. The gods standing by. Approval etched into their immortal stances. It's not flashy, but it's full of hope. And then you spot the name. It doesn't matter if you can pronounce it. What matters is that you try. You whisper it, soft and careful. You speak it back into the world. And in doing so, you honor the wish that every ancient Egyptian carried into death. Remember me. Because that's the real magic. Not resin, not linen, not even spells. Just memory. And you've become part of that spell now. You walk slowly now, not through tombs or temples, but across time itself. Each step seems quieter, softer, as though Tonight, you'll meet him as a human being, mummified in a rush, mourned in a hurry, and buried with more questions than answers. You're standing in the Valley of the Kings now, cliffs rising like silent sentinels around you. The stars are brighter here, maybe because the ancients meant for them to be. You step carefully down the narrow corridor of tomb KV62, ducking beneath low lintels and tracing your fingers along the flaked plaster of hastily painted walls. This is the tomb that Howard Carter opened in 1922, revealing what no one expected, a nearly intact royal burial, glittering with gold, furniture, weapons, and chariots. But also, tucked among the wealth, something far more fragile, a rushed, imperfect mummy. Tutankhamun died around 1323 BCE, likely before his 20th birthday. Theories abound: malaria, a broken leg, genetic disorders, an infected injury. Historians still argue whether it was an accident, an illness, or a not-so-subtle assassination. Whatever the truth, His death came too soon, and his embalmers weren't ready. You step closer to the reconstructed scene, his body lying in a gilded coffin within a gilded coffin within yet another gilded coffin. 4 shrines nested one inside another like sacred Russian dolls. It was impressive, overwhelming, but also off. You see, Tutankhamun's body was burned, not cremated. Ancient Egyptians didn't do that, but chemically scorched. Experts believe it happened inside the coffin, post-burial, due to a sloppy embalming job involving too much resin and an enclosed space. The result? A spontaneous mummification meltdown. The resin essentially cooked him. There's your quirky tidbit. Ancient body plus flammable oils plus sealed gold sarcophagus equals one charred pharaoh. Not exactly how you'd want your eternity to start. But it wasn't just the burn. His arms were broken off. His ribs were missing. His sternum gone. Was this the result of ancient handling? Modern mishandling? Or both? Even Carter, for all his reverence, had to chisel the mummy out of hardened resin. Pieces were removed separately. Head, limbs, torso, all catalogued, studied, then reassembled decades later. Like a jigsaw puzzle made of royalty and regret. You might think this is tragic, and it is, but there's something deeply human about it too. Because for all the grandeur, the golden mask, the alabaster jars, the 6 chariots, Tutankhamun's mummification reminds you that even a king's afterlife could be messy. And yet, he endures. You stand before the famous gold mask now, its inlaid lapis lazuli gleaming like frozen tears. The face is serene, symmetrical, calm beyond comprehension. It's not his real face, of course, but it's how they wanted to remember him, not as a boy who died too young. His face has traveled the world, his tomb still draws crowds. He is, in a sense, the most successful mummy in history. Historians still debate whether this is luck, irony, or divine design. Maybe all 3. But for you, it's a reminder that even flawed rituals, even imperfect preservations, can carry immense power if they're fueled by intention. And Tutankhamun wasn't alone. As you step back from the glare of his fame, you see echoes of others. Thousands of nameless mummies, their wrappings unraveled, their stories unwritten. Farmers, bakers, scribes, dancers, children. They weren't buried with gold. They didn't get 4-nested shrines, but they were still wrapped in love, in hope, in linen, and in their own quiet way they endured. You pause to consider the scale of it all. Estimates suggest over 70 million mummies were created throughout ancient Egypt's long run. Not just people, but animals too. Think about that. Millions of bodies carefully preserved over thousands of years, all anchored by one shared belief, that death was a continuation, not a conclusion. And while most of those mummies are lost to time, crushed, burned, stolen, ground into medicine, yes really, some remain. And even those who are gone still left a shape, a whisper, a shadow of themselves carved into the deep story of humanity. You take one last look at Tutankhamun's mask. It no longer feels distant. It feels familiar, like a final wink from someone who made it through despite the odds. And maybe that's the lesson he offers. You don't need a perfect death to live forever. You just need someone to remember. You're standing in the threshold now, between yesterday and forever, between the hush of sealed tombs and the buzz of modern life. One final step, one final breath. You've wandered through embalming chambers and judgment halls, past golden shrines and letters to the dead, and now you begin to return. But before we dim the lights completely, you pause, because this moment right here, right now, is the part of the story the ancient Egyptians never got to witness, the part where their plan actually worked. Because here you are, 3,000 years later, thinking about them, whispering their names, imagining their soft linen wrappings and cracked wall paintings and strange little spells etched onto broken pottery. They would have loved this. Not just being remembered, but being remembered by you. You sit down one last time on the warm stone outside a tomb, the sky overhead bleeding into a lavender dawn. It's quiet here, not because the dead are gone, but because they're settled. Their long journey complete, their scrolls unrolled, their hearts weighed, and, if they were lucky, light. And the truth is, most of them were probably not rich or powerful. They were workers, servants, parents, lovers. Some of them were buried with elaborate masks, some just a scrap of linen and a name scratched into clay. Some didn't even the humblest embalmer muttered prayers under his breath while stuffing linen into the chest cavity of a stranger just in case, because you never know. Maybe this soul would make it to the field of reeds. Maybe they'd remember you for helping them get there. And now, so many lifetimes later, you realize how intimate this all was. Mummification wasn't cold, it wasn't sterile, it was a final act of care. A way of saying, I will help you go on, even when I no longer can. Here's your final quirky fact. In some tombs, archaeologists have found personal notes slipped between the wrappings. Short, handwritten scraps from relatives, a goodbye, a favorite saying, one simply read, until we meet again. And that's the whole point, really. Because in the Egyptian view, death didn't break relationships. It changed their format. It paused conversations, but didn't end them. It rerouted visits, but never canceled them. And so, across the darkened Nile, and the glowing stones of Memphis, and the hot breeze of Thebes, they waited, and remembered, and hoped. And tonight, you answered that hope. You walked with them. You listened, you remembered. Wind down. 300 words. Now the journey slows. The tombs fade into shadow. The stars above, once bright with gods and myths, are softening into a sleepy haze. The sands settle, the linen stiffens, and the whisper of prayers echoes gently like reeds moving in a breeze that doesn't quite touch your skin. The embalmer's tools are quiet now, the oils are corked, the natron has done its job. All that's left is stillness, the kind of stillness that isn't empty, but full, of memory, of belief, of time wrapped tighter than any shroud. You lie back against a stone, still warm from the sun long since set. The sky shifts from deep indigo to silver fog. You hear a single bird cry in the distance, maybe a bassoul still traveling, or maybe just the desert stretching out its wings. There's nothing more to do. The Ka is fed, the Ba is free, the name has been spoken, and now, even your own heartbeat feels like a drumbeat from some faraway temple, steady, slow, and calm. Let the night fold around you. Let the cool dark carry you. You are not in a tomb, you are in a story. And in stories no one is ever truly gone. So breathe slowly. Let the linen of sleep wrap around your thoughts. Let the incense of memory curl at the edge of your dreams. And if you find yourself drifting across the Nile, toward a field of golden reeds, don't worry. That just means they remembered your name too. End of script. Sweet dreams.